Welcome back. Hey, I hope you're still loving it here. So for today, I'll be talking about my research paper titled Gender and Urban Migration in the 20th Century South Africa. This paper references authors that have tried to awaken feminist history, such as Belinda Bozzoli, Cherryl Walker, Palisa Nzuza, Thenjiwe Magwaza, Catherine Burns, Helen Bradford, and Nafisa Essopsheik. She's the one who supervised this paper. She's a lecturer at the University of Johannesburg under the History Department. So to answer this question, why this paper? Why this topic? Why women? Why gender? The aim is to understand why were women's mobility, freedom of movement, why were women the last one to be pelotized, why were women not regarded as important compared to men. Specifically, I will show how religion, polygamy, and culture were all used to practice the authoritative rule on women. The focus is on urbanization and migration. I'll be outlining the challenges, the experiences that these women encountered on their journey to hope. In her article titled Conversations with Women of the Shembe Church, Self-Perception and the Zulu and the Role of Zulu Culture, Magwaza writes how women were not allowed to hold the leadership positions. To a point they even accepted that as a woman, you don't have to rule, you don't have to lead. Even in the households, they conformed to the idea that as a man, one would ask, why were women the last people to be politicized? Were women weak, or were women more stronger than men? Or were men more stronger than women? Upon arriving at the cities, women engaged in activities such as beer brewing. Even though it was not allowed, women defied this law. For example, in the Katomano dance, women continued to brew beer. And Edward states that in a place named Dryhoek, the Mponde women were also involved in the production of illicit beer. We need to know that despite being important in the history of migration in South Africa, women experiences and encounters were rarely written about. I think it is also important to state that migration mostly affected the children. Their fathers were politicized and worked in the mines in the urban areas. The women fled because of the oppressive rules that existed or were practiced in the rural areas. For example, in the Inanda seminary, a girl child was taught housework. Housework such as dressmaking, laundry, cooking, and sewing. Nothing that prepared these women or these girls for formal work. Women independence was not encouraged at all. I believe that African women migrants of the 20th century wanted to bring about transformation. Women were now tired to live under the wing of the male figure in their lives. The 30th century was a remarkable era as women wanted change as they migrated to cities such as Durban, East London, and Johannesburg. From the 1930s, brewing, gambling, walking, and sewing worked well for women and their financial standing. However, women were still denied access to housing. This was a way to continue with the system of patriarchy, even in the urban area. Because of their enthusiasm, because these women had goals, in the late 1970s, they became involved in factories and industrial work. But this information was not well documented. This shows how women were categorized and poorly analyzed in the women historiography in South Africa. For example, migrant women were associated with bad reputation, dirtiness, and sexually transmitted diseases. To mention that in the Tswana land, runaway wives used to be hunted and beaten to return back to the villages. In the Tswana culture, physical abuse was encouraged, especially on women. The patriarchal rule hindered the attainment of goals, the dreams to be achieved. And, for example, Nafisa Essopsheik in her article states that in 1863, a woman named Nomasondo was tortured for running away from her husband. Lobolo was a source of oppression, especially in the rural areas, on women. Because if they were to pay a bride price for you, men saw that as a valid reason. The 20th century migration came with marriages falling apart, polygamous marriage falling apart, because women were now wanting to transform themselves. Women now wanted to be independent and face lives without spouses or male figure controlling their lives throughout. More women started to reject inequality, subordination, oppression, restrictions to freedom of expression, mobility, and they wanted their voices to be heard more and more. Religion subjugated women as, in the urban spaces, women were forced to convert to religions such as Islam because that was the only way for them to access housing. For example, women created organizations such as the Daughters of Africa, the Amanyano. These organizations were used to uplift women, to empower them, and they also helped women to be unified in power for fighting this oppression and to fight this authoritative rule that the male figure exerted on their lives. The Basotho women were refugees from troubled marriages, failed marriages, because they were involved in things that they called in Sesotho chubediso. These women were seen as immoral, they were seen as weak, they were seen as ill behaved, to an extent that they were said to lower the productivity of the men who worked in the rent mine. Subordination not only existed in the rural areas, however, it existed in the tall and long buildings in the cities, in between the bright lights of Johannesburg, Durban, or East London. Bozzoli states that even though women were polarized, this polarization still put them under the status of disadvantaged. For example, she argued that the freedom that women longed for, they never fully had it, as they in urban areas, just like in the rural areas, was still considered second compared to men. To add, in the urban areas, women who used to wear makeup were regarded as women who did not uphold the status of respectability, as makeup was associated with prostitution. Women wanted to be free, women wanted to be themselves, women wanted to express themselves in the way they wanted to. However, women were still oppressed even after migration. They wanted to go to urban cities, to the urban areas to search for a better life, to change their lives and to be free to be their own persons. Women wanted to shift from keeping the home, from keeping their homestead alive, from keeping their children to keeping themselves, their ambitions, their goals, and their aspirations alive. For example, from the 1970s, authors such as Penelope Davidson started to write about women historiography in South Africa. This also encouraged other authors to continue to try to document women history in South Africa adequately as that of men. For myself, I feel like women history is not well documented. However, authors are still trying to document human history. For example, my master's thesis will try to awaken a woman named Rita Nzanga. This is motivated by the need to know that women existed in our history. There are women who were never known, there are women who were ignored or rather silenced in the history of South Africa. Their voice need to be heard, their names need to be known, such as Kwena Mashala, Atabile Masola, Tenjiwe Magwaza, Cherryl Walker, Shantini Naidu, and Dr. Malloy. These authors have tried to write about women and resistance in South Africa. They have tried to write about apartheid, marriage, religion, culture, polygamy were all used to oppress women. They were all used to silence women and not give women the independence or the freedom they needed as a gender in South Africa. What I've learned from this paper is that women were not weak, women were not inferior. However, during the 19th century, women were already put under the category of weak. The reason why women were the last to be polarized is because men were seen as stronger, they were seen as masculine. So, my question is, why were women trusted? Or because they married them according to what the Basotho people call forced marriage, they call it shubediso. Thank you, and I hope you've learned something and I hope you enjoyed. My name is Bukutlo Tlabanelwa, and I'm currently reading for my master's.